Hey everybody, welcome to After Dark. I'm your host Church, and on this channel I will be talking about the strange and unusual and stuff of that nature. It's been one of my within the last couple of years, it's been one of my go-to topics. Like I find it interesting. Ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, all that stuff. Like it's all pretty neat. Like I've been pretty obsessed with cryptids lately, but this series will have a little bit of everything because it's a mixture of my own encounters, and sadly it's not just cryptids that I have encountered. Like that didn't happen till later on in life. I mean, there's been, tellings of them, and some of the stories that I've accumulated and picked up happened when I was younger, but I personally didn't have an encounter until I was older. And I guess it's because out of sight, out of mind, I lived in a pretty secluded space, and it just it's it's hard to explain really. But anyways, I'm just gonna dive into it. This series is gonna be firsthand accounts that I've had throughout my life, and some of them actually wound up getting explanations, and I will tell those explanations if they have one. Like, there's only been a few, that wound up with an explanation. So, but starting off this series, I'm going to be talking about an encounter I had whenever I was about 13, maybe 12. I can't remember. I mean, it started when I was, I guess you could say, 10 or 11. I think I was 10. But it culminated around the time I was 30. The big issue happened whenever I was about 13 or 14, one of the two. But my grandpa used to come down every Christmas to visit with me, my dad, my mom, And whenever he married my grandma Margie, she would come down like later on in life. But for the first, quite a few years, it was just my papa. Well, uh, my papa used to sleep on the couch. Like that was, but then some, he never told me till later on, and like I said, I'll get to that. But he switched and he started like crashing in my room with me. I had, I had a pretty decent sized bed, so I was just like, fuck it, whatever. Well, I never could figure out why he switched up and started crashing in there with me, and it was always fun. It was almost like me and Papa on a camping trip. I mean, there was nothing like weird or anything about it. It was just, he'd come in there and lay down, and we'd just sit and bullshit all night until we both fell asleep. Well, I didn't think about how weird it was until later because he used to just pass out on the couch. No, no fuss, no foam, whatever. Like it was what it was. Well, oh, the first time I heard it, I was this is a couple years after he started crashing in my room. Whenever he'd come for the holidays and stuff. Well, one night, like a little while after he had already left and went back home. Well, I was going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and the way the house was set up, there was my room, the bathroom, and then my other room, which I inherited later and kind of kept both, took up the whole back end of the trailer. It was a big bedroom. Well, I was getting up to go to the bathroom one night, and I heard a strange, like, it was almost like an old school radio, like something you'd hear in, like, it was almost like, sometimes it was really old country, sometimes it was like really old, like something you'd hear in the 1920s in one of those blues bars or jazz bars, like something you hear. in one of those period piece movies where the ladies are always up on stage. I heard it sounded like that a couple times, but a lot of the times it was just like old, like country music. I never heard any words. It was just old, like rhythms and it was as you would cross from my old bedroom to the bathroom, like just right there. Like there was only like a few centimeters to where you could hear it. But if you took a step one way, it would go away, and a step backwards, it would go away. So, I mean, like, there was a couple times I caught my mom, like, doing that, stepping forward and stepping back, or stepping back and stepping forward, and I was like, what the hell are you doing? And she's like, you don't hear that? Well, obviously, like, the few times she tried to talk to me about it, I didn't hear it. Like, and even the few times I knew what she was talking about, I didn't want to freak her out and play into it because it just seemed like if your parents are scared, then you get scared, as a kid. And so a lot of the times I'd just be like, no, I don't hear nothing. But I did. And there was quite a few times I would try to figure out where it was coming from because I thought maybe it was an alarm clock at the bottom of the hall closet, or but every time I would check, like, I would always come up empty-handed. Like, I would be looking for the source of the sound, and I never could find it. Well, neither could my mom. My mom went nuts one night and actually emptied the hall closet. She, dug around in my room. She even looked in the bottom of the bathrooms. You know how the sinks always have the cabinet underneath? She dug through the cabinet sink trying to figure out if it was in there. I mean, it was just, we couldn't ever find the source, and it happened so often that if it was from a radio, it would have to be plugged in somewhere. I mean, it happened over the course, like I said, from the time I was a kid to the time I was like 13, 14 years old. Well, finally, one year I went to visit my pawpaw for the summer because I usually went down there on the summers. You get a 3-4 month break for school. You don't want to sit around. I mean, I wanted to go see my pawpaw and go hang out at the lake and all that fun stuff. Well, I got to thinking about it because it was right after the last time I caught my mom doing it. Because anytime we try to tell my dad about it, my dad would be like, "Oh, there ain't nothing wrong with this house," and there wasn't nothing necessarily wrong with it. I mean, whatever it wasn't like it was trying to hurt us, or anything like that. So I'm down there, and I asked my pawpaw, I'm like, "Have you ever heard anything weird in the house?" And it was weird because this man was not really the superstitious type. He never really talked about ghosts or goblins or demons or anything like that. Well, this is when I found out why he started crashing in my room. You see, he was laying on the couch one night trying to doze off, and he said he heard like a music coming from the hallway. And he described it the same way I sat and described it to you guys. It sounded like an old school country, or like an old school, I guess you could say jazz. I don't know what you'd consider that music, but I mean, it's always something that I've always appreciated because I love lounge music. Like lounge singers, they're great. Well, that's it, lounge music. But he said he heard it coming from like the hallway. And the way the couch was say, here's the hallway, and like right next to it is, like where the living room starts, like, because you walk in the door and you turn right and go down the hallway, or you go into the living room. There was no dividing wall. You pretty much walked into the living room. Well, as you walked in, there was a wraparound couch that went from the start of the hallway where like the hallway, and the hallway wall was here. The couch was right here, and it wrapped around, right? Well, he was on this back end, so he could see the hallway pretty clearly. And he said he kept seeing like a shadow man, like a shadow figure, kind of like they described the Shadow Man. He said that it didn't really have any, being to it. It was just like a black shadow of a man, but it looked whole. Like it didn't look, these cryptids are hard to explain, but the way he described it was like the Shadow Man or the Hat Man, whatever you want to call it. And he said as the music got louder, this being, this entity, was coming out of the hallway. And he said, but as the being came out of the hallway, the music got louder. Which I thought was odd because we had never heard it past the little, faint resonance in the hallway. And my papa said that as it got out of the hallway and into the middle of the living room, it turned and it looked at him. And my papa says he let out a scream, but no one came, no one heard, But as he said, as he screamed, it just all stopped. And it freaked him out, and he started crashing in my room because he figured it was a ghost of some sort, and that ghost was for some reason attracted to, the living room. And he was just like, maybe it happens every night and I'm just usually asleep and don't see it, And there's no telling, because as the age of, electronics grew, anytime I passed out in the living room, there was always a TV or a computer going. So, don't know. Anyway, time continued on, and like I said, I never thought about it much after I got a little older, because we always had a TV or a radio or something going in the living room. As technology took off, we always had a computer going, which produced ambient light. So, I was always paying attention to that and less to do with the shadows. Well, as I got older, I got to where I thought I was, grown. I was a grown-ass kid. I was 13, 14 years old and decided I wanted to stay home one day when my parents went to the grocery store in Terrell, which is the town over from where the house was. It was the closest town because, like I said, we lived in the rural area. But where my house sat, you could either go left and go to the little lake town that I live at now, or you could go right and hit the bigger city of Terrell. Well, I chose to stay home one night while they went to Terrell. I didn't really want to go. I had friends that lived next door. So, it wasn't like I was trying to run into any of my buddies. If I wanted to do that, I could just jump the fence and hang out with them. And for some reason, I wanted to just chill by myself for a little while. I guess we all get to that point where we want a little time for ourselves, Nothing real malignant or anything like that. I was talking to a pretty girl on the internet, and who later wound up coming to see me. Well, anyway, I was talking to her on YouTube, not YouTube, Yahoo Messenger. Do y'all remember that? Where you had the screen name, little chat boxes, all that cool stuff. You had an email, I just dated myself, but oh well. Well, this is where everything kind of came to a head, so to speak, because I'm sitting there. And as I'm sitting there talking to Megan on the computer, I've got music going through my speakers, it's like I was having a little, my own little shindig in there. Like, I had music going, I was cooking a pizza, I was just chilling by myself, looking stuff up on the internet, talking to her. Well, I started hearing something behind me, and it was an open floor plan. It didn't start off as an open floor plan, but my mom and dad took out some walls, so the living room and the kitchen no longer had dividers, except for the little wraparound couch we had at this time, which divided the living room and the kitchen and then went down the hallway. and we moved the TV and everything on that wall that the old brown couch used to be on. Well, it's the one right next to the hallway. Well, as the night went on, I kept hearing stuff behind me in the kitchen. And it was weird because my mom had put up all the dishes before she left. I turn around and there's like a couple plates on the counter, shit that wasn't there earlier. A couple plates on the counter, a glass, random stuff. Well, I thought it was weird. I went and looked at it. It was all still clean, so I put it back in the cabinet. I didn't want to make Mom mad, her thinking that I dirtied up all the dishes while she was gone to town. So I put all that shit back up. Well, went and sat back down. And as I'm sitting there, like, you get that feeling, like somebody's watching you, and all the hair on your neck stands up. Then the hairs on your arms start tingling, you're freaking out a little bit. Because it just felt like someone was watching me. Well, about that time, there was a loud slam behind me. It was the kitchen cabinet. The reason I know that noise is because, like, if my mom or dad were out, if my dad was ever angry, or my mom was throwing a tiff, they'd slam the cabinets to get the other one's attention. And pretty much force them to be like, "What's wrong, honey?" Marriage stuff, So I knew that sound. Well, that's what it was. So I turned around, expecting to find, like, my neighbor, because he was always pretty good about, like, showing up and not letting me know he was there and pulling a prank of some sort. Because, there was a couple times he'd sneak in through the back door, which led into the kitchen at this point. Or, like, he'd crawl through my window. He was my best friend at the time. He'd, doing funny stuff. He would, we would always try to fuck with each other. Well, there was no one there. And I kept thinking it was Richard, like maybe he hid and maybe he was hiding. So I scoped the house out. No one was there with me. So I sat back down, a little freaked out, but I'm trying to enjoy my day. So I get back on and I'm video chatting with Megan at this point because I felt alone and I wanted someone. So we were video chatting, and it was the age of the pixelated bullshit. So I'm sitting there trying to continue this conversation with Megan, and she said she swore to God she saw a shadow behind me. And as I turned around, there was more plates on the counter, and as I got up to put the plates back up, it was like somebody just put their arm on the counter and just, because they didn't break, but they all fell to the floor and made clank, clank, I'm surprised they didn't break, honestly, but, I'm grown now, and I keep knocking, like, in these days, even when I knock dishes and shit off the counter, they don't break, so, and they made shit better back then, so that's my only explanation of why nothing was broken. You had pots and pans that got knocked off, like, everything. Well, at that particular moment, I finally freaked because I saw what she was talking about. There was a shadow that should not have been there on the wall. Wasn't mine, because I was across the room. I don't know. It was like whoever should have been casting the shadow should have been standing in the middle of the kitchen. There was nobody there. So, in my infinite wisdom, I freaked out, and I rushed to the door, and I'm trying to jerk the door open, but it's locked. And I go to unlock it, and the lock won't turn. I'm sitting there freaking out, trying to get out, because at this point, the radio speakers start going up and down, and it was like somebody was grabbing pots and pans in the kitchen and doing this. So I am freaking the F out. Like, I don't know what to do. And I'm sitting there, and there's a window next to the door that just, leads out to the front porch. So I finally just go for the window, and I'm sitting there trying to, jiggle the handle to get it to open. Well, finally, I don't know why. I maybe it was tired of toying with me, but the window finally just slides open. So the first thing I can think of to do was just jump the fuck out. and I land on the front porch amongst all the junk that my dad had on the porch that we had stored on the porch because we were going to fix it. And a lot of it we did, but most of it was, it just sat there. So I land on all this shit and I jump up and I look around and I dart. And as I got to the end of the yard where the driveway was that went, like I said, rural area, so our driveway was kind of like a little dirt road. But as I got to the edge of my property line where the driveway was, my mom and dad were coming home, like pulling down the driveway. I sit there and tell my dad what's going on, and he thinks that there's some sort of intruder. And I keep telling him there's nobody in there. It just weird shit's going on, old man. Like I'm freaking out. So he makes me and my mom stay outside, and he runs inside because my dad is honestly the epitome of what a hero should be. Like or a good family man, whatever you want to call it. And it was weird. He said there was no pots and pans on the floor. Everything was where it should be. It made me look crazy for a minute. But after that moment, my dad sat me down and told me, because, I always thought he didn't believe in anything like that. And I kept trying to tell him, Dad, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. And he looks at me and goes, son, things like that can't hurt you unless you give it your full attention. And, that resonated with me because when I quit paying attention and I started pretty much kind of ignoring it, a lot of it died out. Yes, I could still hear the music from time to time whenever I passed. I would still see an awkward shadow sometimes where it shouldn't be, but it never affected me after that. But that was the day that I realized there is shit that in this world that you can't explain. It scared me. It sucks because it was the first day I ever stayed home, on my own, besides the occasional, not everybody's home from work yet, and, and I came home from my neighbors early, except for, like, the occasional few times that, like that, like, it was the first time I chose to stay home on my own, and something really weird happened. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, to this day, I don't know how to explain it. And I guess you could just have to see the old house, which I don't have access to, or I would send y'all a picture. Maybe if I find some pictures floating around in some of these albums my mom's got, I'll post a couple. But that house had such an open floor plan. There was no place anybody could have been hiding. I would have heard if somebody was darting in and out the back door, because for one, you could see it from the living room after they destroyed all the walls. For two, it's just, like you're sitting here on your computer typing and you've got like the window open talking to somebody, they would have seen. But yeah, well, like I said, it was pixelated, but anytime I heard something, I would quickly turn. And so, I honestly don't know how to explain that day. And I really don't know how to explain the shadows that accompany these things. I even harassed the few friends I had that lived around me all the time. Like, did y'all do this shit? Like, was that y'all? Was that y'all? And they would be like, dude, what the hell are you talking about? Like, it began to make me look crazy. So I just dropped it. And I went with what my dad said and just ignored it. And for the most part, like I said, every once in a while I'd hear the music. Every once in a while I'd see a shadow that shouldn't be there. But the less attention I paid to it, the less relevance it had on my life. And the last weird thing I can say is my first bout with sleep paralysis was in that house. I woke up and I didn't see like a lady on top of me with a claw or anything like that. But whenever I woke up, my radio was still going because I used to fall asleep listening to late night radio because it was the only time they played real music, you know, like decent music. Like Kiss FM is like a pop station down here, but at night they would play like old school trip hop sometimes, or they'd throw in some like, you know, some rock beats. So I would listen to it, you know, because I didn't know about the few good stations we had back then. Well, the sleep paralysis thing freaked me out because, like I said, like they say, it feels like someone's holding you down. You can't move, you can't scream, and it feels awful. And I didn't see a lady on top of me with claws like they, you know, everybody describes like the hag raven or something. No, the only thing I saw was that shadow in the corner that shouldn't have been there. And I don't know, like that could have just been sleep paralysis and a little bit of hysteria. You know, I mean, that's the only way I could explain that one, was maybe I was having a nightmare while I was half awake. I don't know. I don't know. But that happened when I was 14, like without a shadow of a doubt, because I turned 15, I think, yeah, later that year. I remember the time frame of that one pretty clearly. Like it happened when I was 14, and it was, oh god, it was awful. Like you feel like it takes everything you have and being terrified out of your wits to finally like push your way out of that. And that night I didn't have the strength to do it. I didn't have the strength to start pushing myself out of sleep paralysis till way later on in life.